now that we have all of our sprites for the player cut up, what we can do now is begin actually placing our player in the environment. Drop into your player folder underneath your sprites and characters, select your idle sprites, and go ahead and drop this down. You can see here that if we run through the animation here, we have an idle animation that we'll get into animating shortly. But for now, I want to take the first frame, which is idle 0, and I want to place it inside of my hierarchy. From here, let's go ahead and with it selected in the inspector, let's rename this to player. From here, we need to make sure that we can actually see this. So currently it's on order layer 0. It needs to be on order layer 50. The reason for this is so that it's always going to be in front. You'll notice here if we look inside our grid and select our tile maps, we have these numbers here, and these are the order and layer of those elements. So we want to make sure that on the foreground, 20 through 29, we want to make sure that we are always in front of our foreground items so that we can always see our player. So here you can see here, we have our player in the scene here. And what we can do now is begin creating our player movement system. One of the things that I want to do with this is go over a fundamental best practice for handling typical artwork in a game. If we were prototyping this out using primitive objects like cubes, we would typically create our player and attach that script to that object. For this, what I'm going to recommend doing is we're going to isolate the model object from being cluttered. And now what I mean by that is our game, we're going to have a health script, we're going to have a player script, we're going to have an animator script. I don't want to clutter up where my sprite renderer is. I want it to be nice and clean so that if we ever make an art change, it's very easy to swap in and out just that sprite and not have to worry about any of the other components. So to do this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new empty game object. I can go ahead in the inspector here, or in the editor, I can type Control-Shift-N, and that's going to create a new game object that's empty. Alternatively, you can go to Create Empty, and let's call this Player. We're going to set the position of this to be 0, 0, 0, and I'm going to take this player sprite, I'm going to rename it to Sprite, and I'm going to place it inside of our player. Once I've done that, I'm going to zero out the position of our sprite. What you can see now is we have our player game object, and within that we have our sprite, and attached to this eventually will be an animator component. And we want to keep those two very clean and isolated. Everything else from its collider, its components, its scripts will be on the parent object and will access the child objects when we need them. This is just going to allow us to have a very clean environment with our characters. So to position our player where we want him, we can go ahead and just move him up now on the Y. And to control our player, we're going to be working with the parent game object. All right, so we have our player here. In the next video, we're going to get started writing the code.